And then there's a third group of people who tell me that they don't really know how things are. They know something's going on, but they can't explain what it is. And it's usually people who are in this third group who want to know if it's time to let the relationship go or dissolve.
I don't like to argue, so I say nothing and fume for days.
How do I set boundaries without sounding like a jerk?
I hate the idea that I might accidentally offend somebody, so sometimes I'd just rather say nothing at all.
Welcome to the Language Alchemy Podcast, and thank you for joining me today. This is your host, Alejandra, a transformative communication teacher and coach devoted to helping you have more peace and more harmony in all your relationships. What's the condition of your relationships? Do you find yourself unsure about some of your relationships? Do you have relationships with partners, family, friends, or coworkers in which you feel some sense of concern, but you can't pinpoint what's going on? Then you may want to take a pen and paper out or your favorite note-taking app, because in this episode, I am going to share with you about 5 signs that tell you it's time to shift your relationship dynamics, and it would be useful for you to write them down. Now, before I start, I want to thank all of you who took the time to tell me how you are enjoying the podcast. This week, I want to thank Daza, Patricia, Joy, Mary, Caroline, Patricia, Barbara, Shannon, and Denise. Thank you so much. Your words inspire me to keep going. And now, let's begin. In my work as a transformative communication teacher and coach, I get to hear a lot about the condition of relationships. And it seems that there are 3 things people tell me about their relationships. Some people tell me that things are terrible, unhealthy, and unsustainable. Others tell me that things are getting much better, much healthier, and more fulfilling. And then there's a third group of people who tell me that they don't really know how things are. They know something's going on, but they can't explain what it is. And it's usually people who are in this third group who want to know if it's time to let the relationship go or dissolve. Well, if you ever find yourself experiencing something like this and you sense that something's going on with your relationships, but you can't tell what that is, and you are wondering if it's time to let go, before you do anything drastic like that, like ending the relationship, I want to offer you 5 things to pay attention to, because it may be that all that's needed is just a shift in your relationship dynamic. If you've been listening to the Language Alchemy podcast for some time, or if you've worked with me as a student or client, or if you're on my mailing list, you've heard me talk a lot about patterns, especially about communication patterns. Now, when we are in a relationship, the combination of patterns that each member of the relationship brings forms a dynamic. So, how do you know it's time to shift or change your relationship dynamic? I have observed 5 signs. The first sign that it's time to shift your relationship dynamic is when you notice that you avoid engaging with someone you've been close with or with whom you've had a sense of connection. So when this person reaches out to you, you frequently don't get back to them, or you wait for a really long time to get back to them, or if they call you, you let their call go to voicemail, or you skip reading their text messages or emails. This is what was going on for a dear client of mine. Let's call her Nikki. Nikki had dreamt of having her own business for years, and at some point, she partnered with one of her cousins, and they launched this business together. In the beginning, Nikki and her cousin were meeting all the time. They talked almost every day. As the business grew, it got more complex. They had more clients, and they also hired other people to help. Nikki noticed that she and her cousin were meeting less and less. And Nikki was feeling upset about her relationship with her cousin. She and her cousin had been so close before. Was it that they were now just busy? Well, Nikki really didn't know what was going on. When Nikki was willing to explore this with honesty and compassion in our coaching sessions, she understood that her cousin had reached out to her consistently, that it was Nikki who would not take the call or who would not respond to a text or a Slack message in which an immediate response was needed. And then her cousin would end up making important decisions for the business without Nikki's input. And Nikki also realized that her cousin had asked her to meet more regularly on several emails. But somehow, Nikki had not registered that question or had not replied to that part of the emails. So it was Nikki the one who was avoiding engaging with her cousin. When we looked into this, we found that Nikki had made a lot of excuses in her internal dialogue to not answer her cousin's call, to not check Slack or text messages, to not respond to the meeting requests portion of the emails. Now, if you find yourself in a situation like that with a friend, a romantic partner, a coworker, or a relative, then you need to do what I guided Nikki to do in our communication coaching sessions. And you need to look into why it is that you are avoiding engaging with the other person. Most likely, what you will find is that there's something in your relationship dynamic that needs to change. And that kind of change is what you are avoiding. When Nikki was able to see this with clarity, I helped her communicate skillfully with her cousin, and she was able to shift the relationship dynamic. A second sign that a relationship dynamic needs to shift is when you do get together with others, but during your time with others, you don't know what to talk about. You don't know what to say, you don't know how to connect with others, and afterwards, you end up feeling empty, or you end up thinking that you don't belong to that group of people or to that friendship or to that relationship. This is what happened to a lovely client of mine. Let's call him Daryl. Daryl felt that even though he had a lot of friends and he was doing things with them, when he would get together with them, he would feel dissatisfied. The way he described it was, Alejandra, it's like I'm watching a movie of something I know nothing about, and I feel dumb, like I'm supposed to get it, but I really don't. The relationship with his friends felt distant and shallow. And he would do things to imitate whatever his friends were doing. So, for example, Daryl would laugh when everybody was laughing, but then he would feel at a loss. So if you are like Daryl, and if you are noticing that you don't know how to connect with others, and therefore you're thinking that you don't know how to belong, that is a sign that you need to shift the kinds of dynamics you have in your relationships. Daryl was able to learn to connect with friends he deeply cared about and feel a sense of belonging with them. So I know you can learn too. The other three signs that the relationship dynamics need to shift have to do with our internal dialogue or what we say to ourselves. If you've been following me for a while, you've heard me say that transformative communication is an inside job. Your internal dialogue has a major impact in how you show up in your relationships and what kind of relationship dynamics you have in your life. So the third sign that your relationship dynamics need to shift is when you say to yourself, nobody gets me, so what's the point? Of course, you may not be using those exact words. You may be saying to yourself something like, my mom doesn't understand what I do for a living, so why tell her? Or, my boss doesn't get my role, and they're too busy to care anyway, so there's no point in scheduling a one-on-one meeting with them. Or, my partner is way too stressed out with work and life, So I'm not going to talk about our future. I'm not going to bring this up for a while. If you notice you say things like that in your internal dialogue, then the dynamic you have in your relationships need a shift, especially if you notice that you end up feeling lonely, misunderstood, or hopeless. Because when you show up in your relationships with that kind of mindset, most likely you are not going to be seen, heard, or understood, because you are going to show up in your relationships like my lovely student Ginny used to show up. She would be physically there, but she wouldn't talk much. The fourth sign that it's time to shift your relationship dynamic is also related to your internal dialogue. And that sign is when you internally blame others for how things are and simultaneously believe that your needs will never get met. My dear client, let's call her Monica, would say to me, Alejandra, this is what always happens to me. This is the story of my life. The only people who want to hire me are people who are going to push me, put pressure on me, and make me travel a lot because I don't have kids. And I already know that when it's time to talk about a salary increase, I'm going to get some BS excuse about how we're doing well, but not that well, and be asked to wait forever. Or maybe you'll show up like another client of mine, let's call him Randy. Randy is a wonderful man, and he was convinced his wife would never let him take a sabbatical. And simultaneously, he would blame her for what he called his broken marriage, his being burned out at work, his inability to fulfill some of his dreams, how stressful his job was, where they lived, how they spent their free time. And in the beginning of our work together, the list would go on and on and on. You get the idea. If after listening to this, you are recognizing that you too tend to blame others for how your relationship or life is, and that you further believe that no matter what, you're not going to get your needs met, if that's you, then it's time to shift your relationship dynamics. Finally, the fifth sign I've noticed that points to a need in shifting our relationship dynamics is when the relationship feels imbalanced. And in the internal dialogue, we find either the belief that we give too much and we don't get enough in return, or that we take too much and that what we give is never enough. I will share with you that this is something I have personally worked with a lot. In my life and relationships, I have oscillated between the belief that I give too much and I don't get enough in return, and the belief that I am taking too much and what I give is not enough. And I can tell you that it's painful to show up in relationships in this way. And as I said, I worked with this a lot. And what I have learned is to listen to my internal dialogue, because as soon as these beliefs show up in my internal dialogue, I know it's a sign for me to look into how I need to shift the relationship dynamic. Now, please notice that I've been talking here about shifting the relationship dynamic. I'm not telling you whether you should stay or you should go. Although, if you'd like me to make a podcast about that, email me. If you're on my mailing list, you have my email, or DM me if you follow me on Instagram, and let me know about it, and I'll make a podcast about it. But what we're talking about here is shifting a relationship dynamic. And in order to do that, you need to get very clear about how you are showing up in the relationship, because if you don't know how you are showing up, then you will not know how to shift your communication or your behavior and have the kind of satisfying relationships that you deserve. And I'm sure you want to be more satisfied in your relationships. And the truth is that you can. You can learn how to show up in your relationships in a way that leads to more satisfaction, more connection, more fulfillment. To help you, I've put together a brand new workshop for you called Healthy Relationships at Home and Work. I'm going to teach you in this workshop about the 3 most common communication mistakes we make that harm relationships and what to do about it so that you can have the healthy and satisfying relationships you are capable of. To sign up, go to languagealchemy.com/workshop. It's a live 1-hour-long workshop on Zoom, and I'm offering 5 time options to make it doable for your time zone. So once again, go to languagealchemy.com/workshop and you can sign up there. I am going to add the link in the show notes as well. Now, let's recap what you've heard in this episode. In this episode, I talked about the 5 signs that it's time to shift your relationship dynamics. And these 5 signs are: number 1, avoiding engagement. Number 2, not knowing how to connect with others by not knowing what to talk about. Number 3, not sharing about you or what's important to you because you tell yourself that nobody gets you. Number 4, blaming others for the condition of your relationships while believing you will never get your needs met. And number 5, having unbalanced relationships in which you believe you give too much or you take too much. Thank you so much for listening, and a special thanks to all my clients and students. Thank you for learning to show up in your relationships like the wonderful, intelligent, and capable people you are. And once again, come to the free workshop I'm offering in the next week. It's called Healthy Relationships at Home and Work. To save your spot, go to languagealchemy.com/workshop. Until next week, and as we say in Argentina, ciao ciao. Original music by Gary LaPoe. You can find all links in the show notes at languagealchemy.com.